Let me start the evening by introducing myself. My name is Gauri Puranik, and I'm the Director for English Programs for the British Council in India. We have gathered here today with three very noted authors, Geetanjali Shree, Anupama Raju, and Lady Kishwar Desai, and our moderator for the evening, Dr Debanjan Chakrabarti. We are here to discuss Indian literature on the world stage. This event is part of India-UK Together Season of Culture. This program was launched by both countries on 7th July 2022, and it marks the 75th anniversary of India. The program will showcase a host of events across music, theatre, cinema, literature, fashion, and the visual arts. Our discussion today is a panel discussion which will focus on how Indian literature is used in the English curricula as part of the global English canon, the tension between Indian literature written in English and the Indian literature translated into English, and really the need to balance both. Taking us through the discussion today is Dr. Debanjan Chakrabarti. Debanjan is British Council Director for East and Northeast India. He has over 20 years of experience in leading education, development, and cultural collaboration programs in India and internationally for the British Council. A triple gold medalist in English literature from Jadavpur University, Debanjan was awarded a Felix Scholarship for his PhD from the University of Reading, UK. He occasionally writes for national and international publications on education, books, sports, and films. Thank you all for joining us today, and we look forward to a very engaging and fruitful discussion. I would now like to hand it over to Debanjan and our authors on stage. Also to introduce you is Alka J from Access for All, who is our sign language interpreter for the event today. Thank you. Over to you, DC.
Thank you, Gauri, and welcome everyone once again. We're incredibly fortunate to kick off the literature leg of our India-UK Together season here in Kolkata, which I think is one of the major nerve centers of culture, creativity, literature, and all things creative. The city has strong connections with Asia's first Nobel Prize in literature, but it's also incredibly diverse in terms of its literary and creative culture. I mean, the first Hindi newspaper was published from Kolkata, Udant Martand. It still publishes in Hindi, Urdu, Assamese, Nepali, Odia, Olchiki, the tribal language. So I think we are very, very fortunate to be here in the city. It's the city that hosts the world's largest consumer book fair, Kolkata Book Fair, and welcome to the city, all three of you. I'll introduce all three of you very briefly. Geetanjali, to the furthest away from me, is the first Indian winner of International Booker Prize for Rate Samadhi, which was translated into English by Daisy Rockwell as Tombs of Sand. She has written 5 novels, the first of which was Mai, translated by Neeta Kumar, and was shortlisted for the Crossword Book Award. She has also worked extensively in theatre, written a number of play scripts. This includes Tagore's Gora and Ghore Baire. Umrao Jan Ada. You're part of a group called VAD, which is Vivadi. A theatre group of artists, authors, painters, and musicians, and she, just like Kishwar, is an Lady Sri Ram College alum. Lady Kishwar Desai, in the middle, is an award-winning author, playwright, journalist. Her book, The Longest Kiss, a biography of Devika Rani, has won the National Book Award for the best book on Indian cinema in 2020, and you will be receiving the award later this month from the President. Very, very well done, and congrats for that. Her first novel, Witness the Night, published in the UK in 2010. It won the Costa First Book Award, which is a very prestigious prize in the UK. Her other books include Jallianwala Bagh, The Real Story, and it has inspired several exhibitions across India and abroad. She is the chair of the Arts and Cultural Heritage Trust, and that leads on the Partition Museum in Amritsar, and now one is also being set up in Delhi. She is also the trustee of the Gandhi Memorial Trust, which raised, along with her husband, Lord Meghnad Desai, raised over 1.5 million pounds for the statue that is there in the Parliament Square in London. And she, as I said, is also from LSR. Anupama Raju is a poet, novelist, journalist, and translator. She translates from Malayalam into English. She is a Charles Wallace India Trust Fellow. She was at the University of Kent in Canterbury. She was also a writer in residence in France. She has taken part in a number of literature festivals in India and abroad. And her first novel is called See a Novel, and this was published this year. And she has a poetry collection called Nine poetry collection. So welcome to all three of you. If I may start with a question for all three of you. All three of you have a strong connection with translation, either way. So my first question, which is common to you, is translation into English the only way for Indian literature to present itself on the world stage?
Well, to put it very plainly, it would be a complete disaster if English is the only way that literature from anywhere can be put on the world stage. So I really think we must recognize the need for translation from different languages into different languages. So English happens to have a wonderful position in today's world. It enjoys perhaps the top position, and a large part of the world is all about English, including in our country. But I think it's a balance which needs to be very much addressed and set right, because otherwise we are losing a very important value that we all believe in, that's pluralism, the richness of that, the richness of diversity, and we are going monocultural. So I don't think everything should go via English alone into the world. It should be via many languages, English included.
Thank you. Anupama, if I may come to you next.
Thank you. So answering your question, is translation the only way? Well, that is definitely one of the most fascinating ways to get Indian writing onto the world stage, but not just that. One would be to build bridges between Indian languages and make that available to an audience outside India who don't speak English. So get that translated into the wonderful universe of languages that we have out there, into Italian, into Japanese, into French, whatnot. But adding to that, someone like me who writes in English but translates from the Malayalam into English, I think also relying on the richness of the Indian languages that all of us grew up with. Because let's face it, we were not born listening to English. Our mother spoke to us, or our parents spoke to us in their languages. But somehow English is my language of imagination, and I think we will talk about it later. I also use Tamil in my writing, and that is there. It is there in my novel as well. It's a novel in English, but you would find nuances of some of the Indian languages there. So I think our Indian languages can be interpreted by writers in wonderful ways, and English becomes richer because of those languages.
Okay, firstly, I want to say this is a perfectly gender balanced panel, and as is the audience, always lovely to see a lot of women out there. And I think somewhat representative of what we are talking about today, that there has been a domination actually. If we look at literature that was known abroad, for a very long time, it was the authors who were writing in English which were managing to get recognition abroad. You know, because it was somehow thought to be the done thing that you had to produce a novel in English and then automatically you would get a platform and then you would. So I'm very happy to see that that is now changing. And at last, all of us are beginning to realize the richness. We should have realized long ago, of course. But and those novels are getting an international stature. But I do also believe, I mean, whether we like it or not, English does provide one of the biggest bridges. And since I do share my life partly there, partly here, I do also find, you know, it's not just that you write a novel in English or, it gets translated into many languages and suddenly it becomes very popular. No, it doesn't work that way. You have to work very hard. Let me just put it this way. As an author, you really need to be able to establish yourself before even people reach out to you and say, can we translate your book into any language abroad? You know, like, it is difficult. It's not that it just, you get a successful novel and suddenly you'll find yourself inundated with offers of getting it translated into multiple languages, both here and there. And the reverse is also equally difficult. In fact, much more difficult. If I were to write, which I did, my writing is mostly in English, and when I tried to find publishers for my first novel, which, as you said, won the Costa Award. It did very well abroad, actually. In Europe, it was translated into many languages. But when I tried to get the same thing done in India, I mean, it was a real challenge. So it was translated into Hindi, but then after that, so I'm saying there are challenges on both sides. Let's not presume that it's easy either way. Getting books translated, and then there is an art of translation. Our languages are very rich, and even when people have tried to translate Shakespeare into, I don't know, multiple languages, maybe even Punjabi or whatever, it just, the cadences, the nuances, so much gets lost. So just using a word, it's been translated, doesn't actually sometimes do justice to the book or the novel. But your main question was what? That you wanted to see whether English was a bridge.
Is the only way.
It's the only way. And then a lot of us come back, because when I tried to translate Manto, Saadat Hasan Manto, on whom I wrote a play, and when I put it out there, I myself found it difficult to, and also, checked with many other people, certain richness in the Urdu language, which somehow just sounded very cold when it was translated. So, you have to be very, very deep into all of this to do justice. So, do we do justice or not? We'll have to see, yeah.
Thanks, Kishwar.
Allow me to
Yes.
just add a few words to all this. I think we are talking about the need for a more egalitarian order. We're talking about the need for a better relationship between languages. So I'll give the example of my own book, which got the Booker. This was translated before English into French. An excellent translation in French, but not enough people have got to know about that. And English, of course, got it this wonderful visibility, which is, I mean, how can I rue that fact at all? I mean, it's got me the Booker. So obviously there's something wonderful there, but there is an imbalance which has to be addressed, and addressed seriously. It's fine to say what Kishwar is saying, we have to see translation is not some casual job. You have to seriously take an entity into another world. But I think it is very important not to do it in a monolinguistic manner, you know, in a monolinguistic world.
So on the back of that, I mean, what does a prize like the Booker International does for other Indian languages or other South Indian languages, if anything at all?
Well, in an immediate context, I think it does many, many things. I think it does wonderful things, especially if it's a prize which has as much credibility as Booker has established for itself. I think it immediately sheds light on the work and automatically on the world, where the literary world where that work is situated. So obviously it's brought attention to Indian languages, it's brought attention to South Asian languages. And I mean, one of the unfortunate things about our own country, I mean, I'm talking of North India, I mean, I know that a bit better than other parts of India. The middle class, which is educated, a lot of us are mostly educated in the English medium, they know Hindi, but they read their own literature in English. So, they read Tomb of Sand, but after the Booker, I mean, because of the Booker, a lot of them went and started reading the Hindi as well. And no, I mean, I can't tell you the numbers that have come to me and said, you know, this is the first book of Hindi we went to read. And they know Hindi, but they don't read in Hindi. So I think that's another thing, you know, that there's another imbalance there which has to be set right. And in an immediate context, the Booker has done a few things like that. But if it's just going to be a momentary hype and thrill, then it'll fritter away. It has to be something more than that, like what happened, let us say, in South American literature with Garcia Marquez.
Yeah.
He got the Nobel, and then the world discovered South American literature. And many Marquezes, or many better writers than Marquezes.
Very much, thanks, and we'll come back to that, you know, the primary language of thinking in a bit. But Anupama, if I may turn to you on a similar question. You are multilingual, you write in English, your original works are in English, you translate from Malayalam into English. How do you represent Indian reality when you write in English, and it's quite layered, your English is quite layered, so would you like to talk about that a little bit?
Well, the Indian reality, I would like to call it the human reality, and I think at the end of the day, any literature is about the human reality, and it crosses languages, it crosses borders and cultures. So my latest book, for instance, is about universal experiences, emotions, relationships, loneliness, solitude, and those are universal. And in the sense, the only thing I would probably add is we have been talking a lot about women, and we've been talking a lot about relationships and let's say, certain injustices. And those are some questions which are raised and certain elements that are touched upon in my recent book. And in that sense, perhaps it's Indian, but I would like to call it human and universal.
And when you translate, I mean, because in your novel, you know, Tamil and Malayalam seep into your English. Does it happen do you feel it's happening the other way when you translate from Malayalam into English?
Well, I've been predominantly working with a very, very well-known Malayalam author, Paul Zakaria, and he's been translated into many languages as well, and I have the good fortune of living in the same city as him. So we've been working together now for more than a decade. And the great thing about translating his short fiction into English is that it's the contemporary Kerala society that you get to see. The preoccupations of the Keralite society, and some of them quite hilarious. And he has this very ironic way of describing things, and there's a lot of dark humor, and I completely enjoy dark humor. I come from a family of black humor, so it's been wonderful, and you get to see the preoccupations with, they talk about the Malayali male gaze and so on and so forth. So that you find many protagonists in his short fiction who are grappling with those. And so in that sense, I guess it is more of the society and culture, not so much about the Malayalam idiom that comes into the translation. But when I write in English, or at least in this book, what I have tried to do is not so much, it is not the Malayalam or the Tamil that is seeping in. It is, I rely on English for the transcript of certain Tamil classics that I have quoted, that I've used as part of the narrative, as part of the story. So it is the poem that, it is the Tirukural, for instance, those of you who are familiar with Tirukural and Tiruvalluvar. And there is a Sangam poem that makes an appearance as well. So it appears as, it is foreign enough, but I rely on English, to just transcript it there.
Thanks, Anupama. If I may turn to you, Kishwar, I mean, you have explored different modes of writing and expressions in various formats, as a print journalist, as a political reporter on television, as a fiction and non-fiction author. How do these different mediums bring literature closer to readers? Presumably you use each medium for a different kind of readership?
Well, that's a very interesting question. And I think definitely each medium communicates in a very particular way. And that is what makes it either when you're a journalist, there is a particular style in which you write and you are sticking to what we know as facts. Whether they actually are in today's day and age, I don't know, because I think the situation between fact and fiction in print and other journalism is now getting a little blurred. But I think what is interesting for me to have made that transition is what helps a writer evolve. I think it's a process of evolution which makes you realize that what I was writing earlier for a newspaper and expecting everybody to sit up and take notice, so these are the big headlines and things like that, actually, when I'm using the same kind of narrative in a fictional format, and talking about what you were discussing about the problems of women. My first novel dealt with female feticide, then another one dealt with gang rape and so on. Now, these are all issues that I had touched upon as a journalist, and I did not find that it was being given much attention. But when I wrote it as a novel, suddenly the story began to travel. It traveled from India, where the book was written, in Goa actually, then it goes to London, then from there it goes to various countries, it travels all over the world, where suddenly I'm going to audiences and telling them about female feticide and infanticide, telling them what is happening, and we are having discussions. So it kind of, each idiom definitely presents itself in a specific way. It's very exciting, but I think what I try and do as well is, because we do live in an, in an Indian atmosphere. So I'm not saying I write particularly in Indian English, but definitely the way I would be expressing myself, like recently when I wrote a play on Devika Rani, I did very much try and integrate, in sort of English and Hindi and give it that kind of environment or atmosphere. So, and also when you write a play, it's all happening. There is no description. So you leave out the descriptions because you cannot say, and then he looked very sad and he came on stage and then he blah, blah, blah. I mean, that's not how you do a play, because everything, what you see is what you get. Do and not, say. So these are rules for each kind of writing that you do. And I think where we are seriously lagging is that we have such a rich theatrical tradition in the country, and somehow that is not being able to come out as well. I mean, Bengal for itself, I was just discussing today with somebody, where are all the theatres gone? You know, suddenly I was going around Calcutta after a very long time, and I remember that there used to be a very active theatre, you know, kind of going audience here. And somehow it's all English language theatre happening even in Bombay or in other places. So where is the local? So literature, I think that is also a misnomer. When we only talk about literature as books, you know, and we need to make that, you know, make it, expand it more, you know, and look at it from the theatrical, or even, I would say, the kind of museums that we're now doing, in which we're trying to integrate the, you know, the spoken word or the oral histories, which are also very strong narratives, etc. Yeah.
No, I'm glad you touched upon both theatre and the museum side of it, and which is the perfect cue for me to go to Geetanjali. You have, not only have you been translated, you have kind of translated across a medium, especially with Tagore, Gora Ghore Baide. Could you tell us a little bit about what happens in that journey when a work of creative work jumps from the page to the stage? What are the particular challenges that you faced?
I wonder if I know how to answer that. But I'm not sure I'll call it translation, except in a very, in an extended way,
Yeah,
certainly.
exactly. Yeah.
In an extended way, I think we are translating all the time. You know, from the inarticulate to the articulate is already a translation, and from you know, expressing it through this medium and way to expressing it through another medium and way, you move again into some other form of saying it. For me, you know, I've never considered myself a theatre person. So first of all, I get a little anxious when anybody starts speaking about me like I'm a theatre person and asks me something about that, because I've hobnobbed with the theatre world for a long, long time. I'm part of this group, Vivadi. Vivadi, by the way, is it is from the word Vivad, which means debate, but it's also from music. So there's a Vivadi swar in music, which is the swar which you are not supposed to use, the prohibited note. So only maestros will have the what do you call it, courage or dussahas to use the prohibited note and do something wonderful with the music. So we, in our youthful, enthusiastic arrogance, chose the word Vivadi for our group. Anyway, so what, I mean, for me, when I started, what I found most fascinating about theatre was the collaboration of so many forms. And it really taught me that art is about any medium in art is about the amalgam of all forms of art. So that it taught me, you know, while I think without that experience I would have thought literature is about the word. But I think my interaction with theatre taught me that it's about everything. You know, it's about architecture, it's about cadence, it's about colors, it's about music, it's about dance. And you know, we play with these different elements in each field to make something. So one of the first lessons I think I learned was the redundancy of words, which was a very difficult you know, lesson to sort of keep up with, because literature, prose writing, seems to depend ostensibly at least so much on words. So I think that was the biggest challenge. So I learned it from theatre, and I think it fed my writing. I learned pauses, I learned you know, not saying things. I learned saying them in other ways. And in theatre, I learned again, to keep myself at the back. I think it was a lesson in humility, really. They would all laugh at me because I think authors are often very vain about their writing, and they give the words, they give the script to the actors and then get very disturbed that, what are you doing with it? And that's not how I said it. But I was actually quite fascinated at the way things change when so many artists are at it. And it's not too many cooks spoiling the, what is it? Spoiling the broth. It wasn't that. It was actually they were bringing so many other inputs into it, and it was becoming something else. So something I had written with a lot of pain, for instance. Suddenly my words, but they were angry, they were revolutionary, they were something else. No, my words, but there's something else. And I realized how alive everything in art is. How alive, how whimsical, how ephemeral, how, fluid. So I think those were wonderful lessons, but also the challenges. How to say things when everything is so slippery and changeable and so on. So I think one fed the other.
Right.
And
I'll come back to that point that you say about your author's possessiveness about the words and worlds they create. If I may turn to you, Anupama, your novel C kind of oscillates between genres of fiction and poetry. And I think Jerry Pinto very recently called it a povel. So would you like to reflect on that a bit? I mean, how that kind of generic instability, as it were, in your book?
Well, it's a chosen instability, and I guess, I started writing poetry. So there's always poetry inside me. And when I wrote the novel, it was a conscious decision to use poetry and prose. So poetry is part of the narrative. And just to quickly talk about the book, it's about a writer who goes to a city called C. And I've deliberately left it, and there have been I've been the butt of several, jokes, and what does C stand for? So there is C without the sun, there is no sun, and then she keeps taking these mental trips to also her hometown, which is also C, but with the sun. So that is where the oscillation happens. And constantly there is this yearning for this absent man, and we also come to know that the protagonist, who is unnamed again, also suffers from some sort of mental illness, and then that is how the narrative flows, and there is poetry. So Powell, yes, trust Cherry to come up with terms like that. And I'm glad that, in fact, he put me on the spot last weekend and he said, this is the very first thing you're going to talk about, a Powell, so be very careful what you're going to say. Like I said, poetry is inside me, one way or the other, so that had to be included in the narrative. And I feel that is another thing that we could possibly do, going back to your first question, when we talk about how else do we put Indian writing on global stage, or how do we make it more accessible to children, or how do we enrich the teaching of the English language through literature. Like Geetanjali was talking about, when she mentioned how theatre enriches and opens up through collaboration, and even a sentence like, something that we're all familiar with, too many cooks spoil the broth. Take a sentence like that and give it to children. Let them experiment with it. Instead of broth, what would you put in? Are you going to say dal? Are you going to say soup? Are you going to say, what are you going to say? And maybe a dish in Bengal, maybe a dish in Orissa, maybe a dish in Kerala, we don't know. Too many cooks spoil the payasam, I don't know. And give them that freedom to experiment. And I'm so glad that my publishers trusted and took that risk with this first novel of mine. And we need more people. Yeah, oh sorry, Pavel. So we need more people, we need more publishers, we need more awards that recognize experiments and that enrich, at the end of the day, language and translations. That's what we need. Booker was for an English translation. We need awards and we need publishers, we need foundations that recognize all the beautiful work that's being done and the translations that are happening into other Indian languages, for instance. Just last weekend, I had the opportunity to meet someone from the Hyderabad Book Trust, and they're doing a lot of excellent work where Telugu literature is being translated into other languages. Are we even aware of it? I was very ashamed that I live very close. I live in South India and I didn't even know about that. So I think there's a lot of exciting work happening. We just need more prizes, more awards. We need more publishers. And we need teachers who would be open to experiments and would open the minds of children, because children are amazing. They have amazing imagination. We just need to give them that, we just need to empower them.
So on that point, a question for all three of you. I mean, does it matter to you as authors whether your books are available in translation, whether they feature in school or college or university curriculum? Yeah.
Yes. I think it is a very, very big problem. If you do see that, a lot of Indian literature, no, I'm not now talking about just our books, but even others, and definitely these should be integrated more and more into the curriculum. I wouldn't even say into the curriculum, into the reading lists that you give out to children, into the kind of activities you do, which could be during school or even something to do at home, maybe even the parents could be roped in, because I think that is, of course, one side of the story. But to just pick up on a point which you just said, I think we also, apart from the awards and everything, we need more festivals of translated literature, because I think that is the common ground on which, now festivals have become a very big thing, not only in India, but abroad as well, where you can just have it as a niche festival on one particular kind of literature, which could be translated literature. And I think that gives the opportunity for a common ground to emerge. Also marketing and selling of those books, because book sales are important on one end, but readership is important on the other end, and children's knowledge and parents' knowledge of this is also important, and therefore that's where schools come in. For example, I wrote a book on Jallianwala Bagh. This was, I felt, a book that was deeply researched, because I unearthed a lot of, and I had a whole team working with me, we unearthed a lot of very important points about that particular massacre, that, which went back much beyond, both before and after the 13th of April. And we felt that this was knowledge that should have gone out, not just within, say, a festival group or anything like that, but also to the people who are out there where there is information lacking, because most of our history books even just give a little bit, they'll give a half a paragraph on some very important thing which may have happened in our history. And so it's very important that teachers also look at these kind of subjects, which could be things which are not necessarily in the curriculum, but pick them up, bring them out, look at them, even have your own literary festivals in schools, I would say. Get children to bring one translated book in a week. I mean, these are things which we could just pick up and take forward and run with it. But I do believe that if a book is introduced into a school curriculum, it does somewhat change the fortunes of the author, for sure, because you therefore are talking about thousands and thousands of books going out there. So yes, a very big yes. We would love to see all our books on the school curriculum, college curriculum, everything. Yeah.
Geetanjali, would you like to respond to that? Yeah.
Well, individually, as an individual, so pardon my English, I'm not getting the sentence correct, But I don't think it matters to me personally where my book is going. It's a later discovery which is happy or not so happy, you know, that it's not gone anywhere or it has gone places. So, but it isn't something which is, you know, a primary impulse in me to write to get somewhere. But, so I would just put it differently. It doesn't matter to me, but it matters. It definitely matters. And I think Kishwar was talking about the different ways you would write different things as a journalist or as a novelist and so on. I think putting things in different mediums, taking those to the classroom and using these different ways of saying the same thing or talking about the same thing actually perhaps, you know, becomes a very wonderful and variegated way of bringing that thing, you know, giving it clarity and a richness, rather than just saying it in one single way. So I think very different mediums have to be introduced, and children, of course, I mean, children are the, I dread children the most. I said, I'm ready to be rejected by adults. You know, I can put my, I can be my snooty most if adults tell me what rubbish you've written, it's no good. But a child tells me that, I'm demolished. So I think it's very important to find different ways of catching the imagination of children and older people. And perhaps like the, it's just coming to me, I hope it makes sense, the hathi and the, you know, you're always looking at only one part of it. So
right,
maybe
yeah.
coming from different places, you start highlighting many different parts of an entity, and that just brings it to the public so much more and so much better.
Thanks. Anupama, which side of the spectrum?
Well, I agree with both of them in the sense, in addition to that, I think we also need to look at new ways of teaching literature, new ways of teaching the language, because I was very lucky to be part of institutions, not schools so much, but the colleges, where we were given the freedom to interpret classics in ways that appeal to us the most. I remember doing some totally crazy things with Shakespeare, and we could work on costumes, we could do completely, we changed the idiom. And it's like, for instance, having Star Wars, you know, I don't know how many of you have seen it, Star Wars and Shakespearean language. So it's like that. So there are a lot of things that teachers can do. In addition to that, I think we also need to make translations available in libraries and community libraries, traveling libraries, children who do not have access to school education. And not all have that luxury, unfortunately. And there are lots of schools in India which do not have libraries. And they do not have access to books either. So take the books to them if they can't come to the books. And maybe have Indian writing in translation and, you know, expose it to them. And let them play with it and encourage them to maybe tell a story. And so I believe there's a lot that can be done in schools. There can be a lot that can be done outside schools, and make literature fun, and take them out of this box thinking of annotations and, you know, guides which prepare you for exams, because literature is about life at the end of the day, and they have to experience the joy of it. I don't think you have to wait to become an adult to do that. It should start very early.
Thank you. And as we are seated inside a library, it's personally, me and my colleagues, we feel extremely privileged that we walk through a library to work every day, and we Yeah, it's great fun and a great privilege to work in this kind of context. And our teachers take literature to in exactly the same ways you have described to young learners as well as adults, and we use a lot of literature in the teaching of languages. Geetanjali, if I may turn to you, you mentioned earlier that you were possessive about words, as all authors are. When when your work is translated, so when Neeta translated your first novel or Daisy translated your latest novel, what was your role in that? Because you have grown up with English also as alongside Hindi. The other evening at Tolly Club, you mentioned growing up with Enid Blyton, your initial literary imagination being formed by English literature. So what kind of a say do you have in your translations is the question.
Well, I mentioned the arrogance of the writer, but I also, I think, mentioned that very quickly I learned not to be arrogant. So, and possessive. But there are two things which are operating here. One, I think in literature, I wonder how everyone's going to respond to this, but I think literature is not about clarity, it's about confounding. So to that extent, I can't even say very clearly that this is exactly how I meant it. Because I think literature does thrive a lot on ambiguities and ambivalences. So there's already a kind of unclear area, which the translator and the writer are dealing with. So, and there's room for seeing it this way or this way, and disagreeing and agreeing and debating it. So I think for me, I mean, my few experiences of translation, I mean, I have some books have been translated by different authors, but I've somehow been in close collaboration with I think all of them. What I found was that what mattered a lot to me was the discovering that we trusted each other and had a common sensibility and a common sort of gaze, if you will. If that was there, the grounding was fine. After that, it was about fine-tuning and about ironing out differences, and sometimes the translator agreeing to what I had said and sometimes me having to agree to what the translator said. For instance, with the title Tomb of Sand, I spoke about it in Tollygunge Club. I mean, I didn't want the word tomb, but I finally gave in. So, but the main thing is that once I found that these translators had a general sense, or a very sensitive idea of the way I have worked, they responded to the language and the nuances in ways which made me trust them. Daisy played with the language much like I had done, and I just think, suppose there was somebody who had very good English skills but didn't have the humor that Daisy had, this book would have been a complete disaster. So I think those things were much more important for me, and once they are there, I'm able to keep a little distance and detach myself and feel, after a point, you know what you are doing, and I'm willing to let go. And so I've not been over-possessive or over-interfering. But we've had long sort of talks, almost line by line we've talked about things. Yeah.
How is it with you, Anupama? When you translate, what's the level of collaboration with the author?
Oh, it's so writing is a solitary act, but translation is not. And if you're lucky enough to to work with a living author, then this goes hand in hand. So we have conversations, and sometimes one short story takes a while because we're delving into the nuances, and it's a beautiful process. So to some extent, I rely on him. I rely on the authors to understand because I'm very conscious of the fact that this is not mine, and I'm a medium. So I want to do justice to it. At the same time, I also want to, maybe the fact that I write poetry, to some extent, makes me more conscious of language, of imagery, and of the lyricism of the original. So in that sense, I try to be as independent as possible, but otherwise, we collaborate a great deal, we discuss a great deal. I hold my own when I have to, and I've started putting my foot down.
Yes, please. Yeah.
One little detail of my experience always with the translators. What I find really truly quite tiring and excruciating, I must say, is the different level of consciousness at which they work and from where I have worked. Because in some sense, I'm, within quotes, intuition. I have worked a lot with intuition and with, kind of not thinking so clearly about what means what, but going with a certain flow and, it's some inner voice which is guiding me and telling me how to move on. But once it is now in this arena of translation, then the translator needs to be very conscious. And
Very deliberate. It's a very deliberative kind of.
Yeah. So they may not, they need that clarity, even if they're going to make it, unclear when they're writing or when they're doing it.
Right.
So the kind of questions they ask me bring me to some other realm of consciousness where I have to think, where did I get that from? Why a dog and not a cat? Why this? Why that? Suddenly it sort of makes you think about things, and you have to start guessing at answers. So I invent answers and go ahead.
Kishwar, I have a very specific question for you in that domain, which is some of your writing is being adapted for the screen and OTTs. So what happens there? I mean, how much of authorial control can you exercise there?
Thank you. I was just thinking of that while this conversation was ongoing. So yes, my 3 novels are being made into a web series, and this book on Devika Rani is being made into a film. So it is something which I learned pretty early on, that once a book is written, it's like when a baby is born, and then suddenly overnight, it's an adult, and it's run away from you. And very much like what Geetanjali is saying, it now belongs to everybody, and everybody's free to interpret it, and that's what happens. The first thing that hits you is the critics, and then suddenly they're saying things that they were not even in the book, what are they talking about? And especially the first time author, you're very sensitive, and you're kind of really, really getting very upset that even if it's a good review, you're still saying, but I didn't mean that, and I didn't mean that. So I think the first lot of possessiveness goes very quickly. The moment it goes to the readers and you're getting this good, bad, indifferent, whatever feedback you're getting, then it distances. But with me, what happens is I always move very quickly on to whatever I'm doing next. So what happened with the adaptations is that you're given the choice. Would you like to be involved in the writing of the screenplay? And I said, no, Would you like to be there giving any inputs? No. Unless it is something that you really want out of me, which you have not understood about the character in terms of any sort of actual information that I could give you. But it is because these are very different. It's almost like translating into a different language. It's a completely different medium when you're adapting for the screen, because there are so many things which are going to be visible, which is what the director wants to put in. And it could be that, he puts a building in the background, which has a very deep meaning, but maybe that building came like 30 pages later, but it's in a particular scene. I do not want to be tied down with that sort of minutiae. So it's better that the interpretation is according to them, the way they are seeing it. And even though I do have a background in television and I have made films, but you know, I think the book deserves another life. It's a completely other life. And I'm quite excited about the fact as to how are these people going to view the thing that, you know, I wrote in a particular way, but it's going to be very exciting when it comes out. And of course, when I did read some of the scripts, you know, early scripts for Witness the Night, and I was like really mad and saying, no, this was not, then I just said, no, okay, calm down. This is the way they're looking at it. So this was, because a book also gets optioned many times. And now I'm talking about the first time it was optioned. And, you know, there was a screenplay which I had seen. Now, that is completely different, an interpretation which is now being given to the same book by a different set of filmmakers. So even that can happen, that there can be two totally different versions of your book which appear as a script. So it's all very exciting. So it's a lovely journey, yeah.
Thanks. And before we go out and have some questions from the audience, one last question for all three of you. We often hear this phrase, lost in translation, also the title of a critically acclaimed movie. I think Bill Murphy plays the title role. Is there something about gaining in translation?
I'm assuming it's me again first.
Well, we can start with you and with Anupama and then go out to the audience.
Yeah, I think definitely. Absolutely, definitely. I think it has to be seen. In fact, some of those basics have to be good and working. If that's working, then I think it's no longer about losing anything in translation and gaining. I mean, these are not the terms I would think in. Definitely, it's like, now it's like two rich entities interacting. It's about communication and dialogue and, you know, together, I mean, one is giving to the other something and the other is, you know, giving it another language, another garb, another world. So between the two, I mean, this from this interaction, something which is different but the same will come out, and it's some in being different, one could say that something has been left. But it doesn't matter, because in being different, something has been put there, which makes it, again, a wonderful new personality. It is the same, but it is doing something else. It's learned something more from becoming this entity in yet another place. So for me, it's always an enriching exercise. But it's both ways. You know, it's becoming more pluralistic. I think it can't be, I mean, Kishwar put it like this, that totally different ways, but somewhere those are all already there in the work. They're innate in the work. And different people, different languages, different translators, different, you know, whatever, who's doing something different with it, will be picking out some different strand from it and stress from it and building on that. And I think it would be all the richer for it.
Kishwar,
Yeah.
gaining in translation.
Oh, totally. I think it's, for me, it's always very interesting when I look at, even when I look at a piece of art or at anything, you know, which is creative, it's always fascinating for me to see that the way I look at it and the way it leaps out at other people, and there can be so much of a difference in which we are looking at the same thing. So why not that it should apply to the books we write, the plays we write, or even the screen adaptations we do? Why can't they all have their own way of looking at the same world, which has been created once by maybe one of us or any other author. And that world can never be a closed world, because if it is a closed world, people would not want to pick it up. It would not be exciting, because if there would be very strict rules in that world that, oh, this is it, and I have written this ultimate final, kind of document, and no one is allowed to interpret anything, then it would be a very boring and dull world, because it is too, it's a tightly circumscribed thing. So it's not there's not a will we are writing here that, this is the way it is going to be, and I bequeath this to the world. I think that would also be very arrogant on the part of the writer. So I think there has to be some amount of humility in this, that if someone is seeing in your work something that you did not see, and like she says, sometimes just put it there unconsciously, how beautiful is that? And what an idiot you were that you didn't see it when you were writing it, and maybe you could have expanded that a bit more. So I think everybody adds to the creative process. So I think if it's a positive energy that is coming and flowing, then it is definitely a good thing for you. Because for most of us, writing is joy, it's pleasure, it's creative. Even when you're writing about sad things or difficult things, it's all something which you are taking from the world. And it's a process for osmosis, You're taking and you're giving, and everything is happening at the same time. So interpretation is the key. You want people to be able to discuss it with you, because if it is not, that would be difficult.
Thanks. Anupama?
Yeah, I would like to call it found in translation. Found and discovered in translation. And one doesn't have to translate from one language to another for meanings to be lost. We speak in the same language and we don't understand each other sometimes. But translation, on the other hand, makes this connection possible. And at the end of the day, literature is about connections. It's about finding meanings. It's about relating to people and finding your own experiences represented in the experiences of characters someone has created for you. It's like a window, and it opens up this entirely new universe. And if I were to borrow another term from architecture, it's like a house where people from, this represents this little world, and people speaking different languages meeting there and having tea. I would say found in translation.
Rituparna, Karuna, and then Professor Shankar. Yeah.
Yes, very good evening, and thank you for this fascinating session. My question is to Geetanjali Shree, but I have a question that is from there coming to everybody. What you said about your association with the theatre was fascinating. And there are two things you said. One, I would say a concept, and the other that you felt. One, you talked about the term Vivad, which we know as Vivadi. As debate, but you also talked about, the prohibitive note in music, which is something I didn't know. It was absolutely stunning to hear that. And the other you said is that you realize the redundancy of words. Now, given that you've obviously continued writing, so my question to you is drawing on from these two concepts, is that how have you overcome that sense of redundancy in words? And two is this finding the prohibitive note your chief inspiration in writing, because writers have their own inspirations, their particular motivation in writing. And I would ask the same question to others. What has been your chief motivation? But to you, to begin with. Yeah.
Well, the very fact that writers perhaps almost always write about the things and in ways which are not quite usual, in some sense marginalized, perhaps forbidden, is already, it's already there, that they are doing what's not allowed, and they're trying to bring it to the center stage. So that, I think, is just, it happens quite automatically and organically. And if that is in any way some kind of an answer to one part of your question. I'm just going to leave it there. About the redundancy of words, you know, it's interesting you ask me that, because it taught me that it taught me actually to respect words a lot more. Okay, it taught me that words should not be treated like just a vehicle for saying everything. You know, that there's nothing else in the work except words, and whatever has to be done by putting it in the words. So if you're trying to, whatever you are doing, you have to describe it in words. I think it taught me to respect them as something in their own right, not just as a vehicle or a medium carrying a message. And that made me use words differently, sometimes very sparingly, sometimes very crookedly, but it taught me, you know, that it's not a meaning related to where the book is going, but a meaning which is right there in using that word. So just, you know, I think it taught me respect. So I started using them with greater care and started realizing the power of language. Yeah.
Hi. We've spoken so much about translation today, so I had a question about that in particular. Your book, of course, has been translated into English, but you speak and read English as well. But you spoke about a French translation, and I've always wondered, how do you trust the translator when you do not know that language at all? So do you usually rely on the person and whether they seem trustworthy, whether they instill a confidence in you, whether their nature appeals to you, or do you go by reputation? I find it, you know, it's like a blind trust. So I was wondering how that works.
Be prepared for a garbled answer. Okay? But, you know, again, I would say words are not the only way to communicate and discover what the other person is about. And so there are many, many markers and signifiers out there which tell me what's happening. When the French translation is being read and how the French audience is responding, you know, and when I read, you know, those parts in my language or in English, and I see certain responses with the French, then I know that there's something which has been, that has been caught properly. So that's one thing. But also I have the kind of discussions you have with the person. You know how well the person is steeped in the work or in that culture or in that language. All of that gives you a sense of things. But one last thing, I'm sorry, I mean it's frivolous, but I think it has something serious out there. About, I told you, no, slightly garbled, so allow me, but in translation, now this is real. It happened in Kerala, and it was about, it was two people talking, and they were talking in English. How redundant the words are. It's the feeling and the stress on the real thing which conveys it, okay? So I just want to give you an example of that. So this, we were sitting in this car, and this was a driver of this car, and there was a driver of some other vehicle. So he saw him, and he said, "How are you? I hope." And that person replied, "Somewhat, I think." Okay. And I thought this was a wonderful translation. It's
and a perfect translation.
All wrong words, I mean all redundant, but perfect it was.
So I just want to add to what Geetanjali said, that, you know, about trust and so on. So when my novels were translated into French, and obviously I don't know French and German and so on, so I But what was very encouraging for me, like she says, is that the books, the first novel was nominated by the Elle magazine for the Popular Prize in France. So, you know, like the readers vote for a, so it was like amazing that this is a book, I have no idea what that person has put in. I had no conversations with her. And this was like you had conversations with your translator, which is fantastic. I've had zero conversations with any of my translators, and somehow they have a life. The other thing I want to just introduce very quickly into this is which is now becoming very popular, the Audible books. So you have people actually reading out your books. Now, that is something which is, again, very strange, because I've had people sending me the CDs and said, please listen to this. Have I read out your book? You know what? I haven't listened to a single one of them because I just decided this is her interpretation of it. And this is how she's reading the book, and I'm sure she's a competent person. And I don't know for what reason, but, you know, I just stayed away from it because just in case, you know, I didn't actually want to spoil the party in any way. Like, you know, it's going out there. This is her understanding. This is the way she's doing it. So somewhere I think even authors, sometimes you may want to just protect yourself from somebody else's interpretation. I don't know if that's the right way to put it, but it is another translation of the same book which has taken place. However, these are, you know, now very many. It could go beyond languages. It could go beyond anything.
But just one word, if
Yes, absolutely.
a few words. But I think it's also, I mean, that last frivolous little exchange, I think it also is a tale about understanding. I think we have to teach everybody, you know, that understanding is not about just spelling it out. Understanding involves so many other things. And we look at films and we look at paintings and we stand there and say we don't understand, but there's something there. It's doing something. It's opening some space inside me. And I think those are also, you know, the comprehension markers that we have to start recognizing in ourselves and teaching wherever we can, you know, in others. Yeah.
Anupama, would you like to come back to that question on trust and translation? I'm afraid that we have really run out of time. I'd really like them to read a bit. And then, of course, you can talk to them while they sign the books and over refreshments. Yeah.
Yeah, I think trust, is this on? Yes.
It is on.
I think it calls for a lot of generosity of spirit on the part of the author to trust the translator. Once the translator has proven her mettle. Too much of interference can really kill the process, kill the book. And it calls for a lot of, it is a lot of hard work. The translator, for instance, now as a translator, I can say that it is a lot of hard work. And I turned to translation mainly to come to terms with my Malayali roots. And it is not a language I studied. I grew up in Tamil Nadu, I grew up in Chennai, so I studied Tamil. I did not study Malayalam, but I speak it very well and I read. So I learned it across my childhood, I learned it as an adult. And for me, translating one story is to use, I'm sorry for the cliche, it is a labor of love. So when it is very important to work with an author who's sensitive to that and who gives me that freedom and trusts me enough to put in my heart and soul into it, because I want to do justice to that. At the same time, because I know I'm very aware of the fact that I'm representing Paul Zachariah's voice and I have that responsibility. But thankfully, he trusts me and we have that friendship. So, yeah.
Thank you. Can I request Kishwar to read a bit, then Anupama, and finally we'll end with Geetanjali reading from both Hindi and English.
So this is from
We really
which is the book
it's
on
all right.
Devi Karani, and I think all of you know why it's called the longest kiss, because For many years, she held the world record, I think, for the longest kiss on screen, at least in Indian cinema, because she and her husband had this passionate clinch, in this film which they'd made together called Karma. And so, in a sense, for me, the book represented her life and the fact that even though she retired almost in the 1940s, but you do find that a lot of people are still very interested in her, even though very little information is about it. So I'll just read a little bit. It's a biography. So it has been written with a lot of documents in it, a lot of letters which I discovered, especially letters that she exchanged with Svetoslav, her second husband. And that is how the book has, if I may say so, the authenticity with which and the credibility with which it has been now received, for which I'm very grateful. So I just read a little bit about how she met Himanshu, who was a very charming Bengali. And this is a very Bengali book, actually, because both of them meet when they're, because she's this gorgeous, great grandniece of Rabindranath Tagore, who meets Himanshu Rai, her very gorgeous husband in London. She had very good taste in men. Even her lover was extremely handsome. So, when Devika first met Himanshu, she was not yet 20. It was only after they were married that she realized that he walked on a very thin edge. A workaholic and a high achiever, he had enormous expectations from those around him. If she upset him, he would not just criticize her, he would give her the usual thrashing, as she put it. This was for me a huge shock when I started reading her letters to realize that she was a victim of domestic abuse, which she hid for all those years when she was alive. She would write later of her scars, this is in quotes, which human beings have inflicted upon me in all their vile ugliness and horror. Those things that happened had really taught me how to take punishment bodily, mentally, and at the same time grow within and try to better myself. In her childlike misery, she began to think of this violence as part of her training to remain humble and yet hopeful of a better future. She always had a pact with God. She told God in her own way, and she writes about this also, that I will take all this thrashing, I will take all this beating, but just give me a better future. And she prayed desperately for it. Nothing in her sheltered life had prepared her for this. The only time her father had scolded her, she had run away at the age of 3.5. Now, 25 years later, she began to realize that she might have to walk away again from all that she held so dear and had worked so hard for. How else was it possible to survive? How long could she keep up this dual existence of acting for the camera and then acting in real life? How long could she continue to pretend that she was not bruised and beaten? The affair with Najam, this was her lover, very good-looking guy, gave her the warmth and attention she craved, quite apart from escaping the machine-like life she now led. She never spoke about the affair and its aftermath or defended her actions, and her rectitude for most of her life was often mistaken for arrogance. It was only in a letter written on 26 June 1945 to Svetoslav that she admitted that Himanshu did not hesitate to abuse her physically, sometimes leaving her bloodied and unconscious on the floor. But she added proudly that she took his physical and verbal abuse with courage so that no one would ever know what she had gone through. She did not want to be an object of pity, nor did she want Himanshu to feel he had power over her. She kept the pain to herself and drowned herself in work. So that's the reading. Thank you.
So like I mentioned, in C, a novel, a Powell, you have the unnamed protagonist who arrives in City Without Day. So I'm just going to give you small glimpses, which will altogether should last a couple of minutes. City without day. On this cold afternoon, see, the city without daylight shines like black satin under a benevolent moon. It is murky, but the trees on either side of the road seem to rejoice in their shadows. The branches quiver like wrinkled, bony fingers. Unaccustomed to what winter does to trees in this part of the world, I think of home, my sea, where the trees are a lush green all year round. Every now and then there is evidence of life. Two residents of sea walk with their dogs while another rides a bicycle. There are wood pigeons cooing incessantly. They sound very different from the pigeons back home. Melancholic and mournful, their cries punctuate the air. Curious about life without daylight, I wonder what night would be like. And then she goes on, and as I mentioned earlier, there is also this man that she's constantly longing for. So I'm just going to read that bit now, a small bit. And this one has both prose and a poem. There were a few occasions he came close to letting me go. You shouldn't waste your time with me, he had said. I've told you I'm the wrong man for you. Don't fall in love with me. If you're not happy with me, if you can't handle the ups and downs and my reality, the responsibilities and the commitments I have, then what? I had retorted. I had insisted he speak my language and tell me he couldn't let me go, that a life without me was inconceivable, that he was madly in love with me or that he wanted me. The more I insisted, the less he expressed. That enraged me all the more. If I was trapped inside my house of expectations, he was a free spirit holding the key, refusing to let me out. Yet, here I am, a willing prisoner, strangely nourished by his scarce love. Is it worth all the disappointment, the ups and downs of separation, as he put it? I often ask myself. But he's working on me. Despite it all, he's working on me, training me to expect less. Perhaps I'm making progress. And here's a poem. Missing. You don't need to talk to me every now and then to let me know your love doesn't change with the season. Your strength lies in your silence, and my weakness in my demands. So though I say, don't break my heart, and you panic, you just might, you won't. Because like the window that opens to perpetual sunrise and seagulls, you will always fill my room with light. This darkness is temporary. This missing, very ordinary, and I never settle for anything plain. I'd like to close with a small section where the protagonist or the author, as the case may be, is trying to do an experiment, just to give you a sense of what an experiment this book is. I want to explore roads that take me to places that don't exist. I'm a cartophile, especially of made-up cities and towns. I write about unknown places. And the narrative breaks into a poem. A dictionary of unknown places. The globe collides like a weird cocktail. It is an alien geography, a dictionary made up of places inviting and of cities unknown. Canterpore, Thiruvananthapuram, Chennai Med, Kochi-Chester, London Puram, Whitstable Nagar, Bombay Chester, Delhi Med. These are the places burning like wood, spreading like fog. They don't need boundaries or border control, only the night of a willing mind and the might of a fleeing soul. Thank you.
one will you read first?
Tell me. Hindi. Okay. इतना बस बता दे रही हूँ आप लोगों को कि it's about it's set in the family. And this little piece is about the kind of bickering that goes on in families. And a lot of it is nonsensical, but sometimes it can conflagrate into a serious war. So it's just about that daily bickering in families. Oops. कहना चाहिए परिवार को सॉरी कहना चाहिए परिवार को जबकि कहते हैं महाभारत को कि जो दुनिया में वो उसमें और जो उसमें नहीं वो कहीं नहीं, कवि के तसव्वुर में भी नहीं, यानी भूला भटका आतंकवादी, गर्मा भरमा वामपंथी, नारीवाद और नारी, हरवादी और जीती हारी, सब परिवार में या महाभारत में जिसे जैसे रुचे पचे। महाभारत में दुनिया, दुनिया परिवार में और इसलिए परिवार में महाभारत, जो रोज़ रोज़ के हंगाम हर एक महाभारत। इसलिए परिवार के हर सदस्य को पता है कि जो मुझ में वो किसी में नहीं और जो मुझ में नहीं वो होने लायक नहीं। और ये कि मेरे पास दिमाग है, औरों के पास पैसा, और ये कि मेरा फ़ायदा उठाया सबने, अब हम नहीं बाकी करें। और ये कि हम दूर रह के भी रहम दिल, तुम वहीं हो पर कितने बेरुखे। और ये कि हमेशा हम ही देते हैं और आप हमेशा लेते हैं। और वाह आपकी सूझ जिसमें आप तो मिलनसार, हम वही तो मतलबी यार। आप चुप तो विनयशील, हम चुप तो काइयाँ। आप करें सो शिष्टाचार, वही हम करें तो लल्लो चप्पो। आप कहें तो साफ गोई, हम कहें वही तो बदतमीज़। हम पूछ लें तो अश्लील जिज्ञासा, आप पूछें तो हमदर्दी। हम करें तो हमारी सुविधा, आप करें तो आपकी कृपा। हम करें तो कंजूस, आप करें तो किफ़ायती। हम चुप तो घमंडी, आप चुप तो शर्मीले। हम तो बड़े सीक्रेटिव, पर आप तो बस रिजर्व्ड। और हमारे फैशनेबल कपड़े नकल, आपके ज़माने से कदम ताल। और हमारा गया तो ऐसा क्या बवाल, आपका गया तो लुट गए हाय हाय। और हमने किया तो क्या किया, और आपका इरादा वो भी किया। यानी हम वो जो हमने किया, आप वो जो आपने सोचा। और हमने कहा तो कटाक्ष, आपने कहा तो मजाक। और हमने अपनी बताई तो मियाँ मिट्ठू, आपने बताई तो सहज सत्य। और हमने पा लिया तो हथियाया, आपने पाया तो आपका अधिकार। और हमने कहा तो हमारा गुमान, आपने कहा तो आप तो हैं ही सही। और हम गुस्साए तो ह्यूमर की कमी, आप गुस्साए तो आत्मसम्मान। और हम कर गए तो कर्तव्य था, आपने किया तो बड़प्पन हुआ। और हम सफल तो आपका सहारा जो मिला, और आप असफल तो हमने अड़ंगे जो डाले। और जी हम रह गए तो हम काहिल, आप रह गए तो आप त्यागी। और जी हम न समझे तो पैदल, आप नहीं तो भोले। और जी आपको हमसे वैर तो हम इसी लायक, हमको आपसे वही तो हम ईर्ष्यालु। और जी हमने किया तो स्वार्थ, आपने वही तो परमार्थ। और गर हम न करें तो बेपरवाह, मगर आप न करें तो मजबूरी। और हमने जितना किया सो कम, आपने ज़रा भी सो ज़्यादा। और हमारी नाक टेढ़ी तो बदसूरत, आपकी आँख टेढ़ी तो कलात्मक। और जी अपनी तस्वीर अच्छी तो फोटोग्राफर माहिर, आपकी अच्छी तो आप सुंदर। और जी हम गोरे तो छिली बटेर, आप सफ़ेद तो आप तो विलायती लगें। हम काले तो बैंगन भट्ट, जबकि आप काले तो ब्लैक इज़ ब्यूटीफुल। हम मोटे तो खाऊ पेटू, आप मोटे तो रौनक चमक। हम दुबले तो सूखी लकड़ी, आप सीख तो सौम्य सजिल। और हम चलाएं एसी तो अय्याश, आप चलाएं तो सेहत नाजुक। हम पिए तो शराबी, आपने पी तो डॉक्टर की हिदायत। हमारी ज़बान अंग्रेज़ी तो शो ऑफ हम, आपकी तो शिक्षित आप। अच्छा, आपकी ज़रूरत तो हम एक परिवार, हमारी ज़रूरत तो आप अलग और अकेले। और जी आपका काम काम और हमारा काम तमाम। यस जी, नो जी, हम जी, तुम जी, और हम और तुम और तुम और हम और अम्मा, और इतना हमने किया और तुम साथ हो के न देखते। और बेचारी बुढ़ा गई और पड़ी रही और अकेली और जानती भी नहीं क्या कर रही है, और नाम भी गलत सलत दे रही है, और दिमाग पर है असर, और सब के सब दौड़ पड़े। Now the same in English. Same and different. Anything we say about the Mahabharata could also be said about families. They contain all that exists in the world, and whatever they don't contain does not exist, not even in the imagination of a poet. That is, the gone astray terrorist, the hot-headed leftist, the female and the feminist, the everythingist and the opti-pessimist, all in the family, or in the Mahabharata, whichever you prefer. The world is in the Mahabharata, the world is in the family, and thus the Mahabharata is in the family. The daily flare-ups, each one a Mahabharata. For this reason, every member of the family knows that what exists in me exists in no one else, and what does not exist in me has no call to exist. And that I have the brain, others have the money. And that everyone has taken advantage of me, so from now on, I won't do anything, let the rest of them do it. And that I'm the most tender-hearted, despite living far away, while you are right here, yet so completely inconsiderate. And I'm always the giver, and you are always the taker. And wow, your wheeling dealings are just because you are such a friendly soul. But if I do the same, I'm cold and calculating. When you are quiet, you're polite, but when I'm quiet, I'm wily. And if you did it, it's good etiquette. If I do, it's fawning flattery. If you say it, it's candid. If I do, it's just rude. If I ask, it's obscene curiosity. When you do, it's sympathy. If I do it, it's for my own convenience. If you do it, you're most beneficent. If I do it, I'm being stingy. If you do it, you're being thrifty. If I'm quiet, I'm acting proud. If you are quiet, you feel bashful. I'm extremely secretive, but you are just reserved. And my fashions are four, whereas yours are cutting edge. And if I lose something, what's the big deal? But if you do, you've been robbed, woe is me. And if I do something, it amounts to nothing. But your merest intention of doing something amounts to actually doing it. That is, I am what I've done, you are what you've thought. And what I said was scornful, but when you said it, it was just a joke. When I said my piece, I was being a show-off, but when you had your say, it was the unvarnished truth. And if I got it, I grabbed it, but if you got it, it was your right. And if I said it, I was deluded, but if you said it, you were just right. And when I get angry, I'm humorless, but when you do, it's self-respect. And when I went and did it, it was my duty. But when you did, it was big of you. And when I'm successful, I got help from you, but when you are unsuccessful, it was me who threw a spanner in the works. And if I get stuck, I'm a slacker. But if you get stuck, you blew your chances. And oh yes, if I don't get it, I'm a moron. But if you don't, you're innocent. And oh yes, if you're enemies with me, I deserve it. But if I am with you, I'm jealous. And oh yes, if I did it, I'm self-serving. If you did, you're self-effacing. And if I don't do it, it's carelessness. But if you don't, it's helplessness. And however much I've done is not enough, and whatever little you do is plenty. And if my nose is crooked, it's ugly. And if your eye is crooked, it's artistic. And oh yes, if I look good in a picture, the photographer was gifted. But if you look good, it's because you're beautiful. And oh yes, if I'm fair, I look like a skinned quail. And if you are pale, you look like a foreigner. If I'm dark, I'm Mr. Eggplant Head, whereas when you do, black is beautiful. If I'm fat, I'm Tubby Tupkins. If you are fat, you're pleasingly plump. If I'm thin, I'm dry as a stick. If you are skinny, you are svelte and shapely. And if I turn on the AC, I'm decadent. But if you do, you suffer from delicate health. When I drink, I'm a drunk. When you drink, doctor's orders. If speak in English, I'm giving myself airs. If you do, you're educated. Oh, and if you need it, we are all one big family. But when I need it, you are separate and alone. And yes, your work is the bee's knees, but mine's a hobby, if you please. Yes and no, no and yes, me and you and me, and you and I and Amma. And we did so much, and you were with her, but you didn't see, and the poor thing grew older. And she lay there and alone and didn't even know what she was doing, and she's even forgotten and inventing some imaginary names, and her memory is clearly affected, and everyone went running. Thank you.
Thank you so much. My colleagues have a small memento for all three of you.
If I may just say something.
Yeah.
While we listen to readings, I just want to also just call attention to Alka here, who has been translating just, can we have a round of applause? It's just amazing. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Alka. And this is the first time we are doing this translation, so thank you so much, Alka, and also Siddhant for your help. Yes, vote of thanks, and then the mementos. Yeah, thank you.
Well, thanks everyone. I think I must extend a thank you to everyone involved in this event for such an insightful discussion. Actually, yes, Siddhant warned me, I have to use the mic. Yes, so again, I must thank everyone out here formally from the British Council India team. To begin with, I of course have to begin with the authors, lovely authors. You've added so much value to the discussion today, specifically the references, relevant references you've brought from your own work. Something in particular that is relevant to the work we do as English programs is with schools and teachers. And I think that discussion about literature's place, especially literature in local languages and its place in curriculum, was much required. It was high time we talked about it. Too many cooks spoil the paisam, I think, is something, a takeaway I'm going to immediately take to the teachers. Thank you very much for that. And on that note, we have a small gift for you and a note of appreciation. Quick thanks also to Dr. Debanjan Chakrabarti, who did a fabulous job of asking the right questions. Yes, and bringing the best out of the discussion. We don't have a gift for you, though. And I must say, thanks to a special audience today. You've been patient. I know we took only a few questions from you, but I must admit that while we were prepping for this event, the questions we came up with, a couple of them that were asked here were way beyond our league. So thank you for them, but you will have an opportunity to talk to the authors in a bit. Thank you for that. I want to thank Access for All, who have been our equality, diversity, and inclusion partners. Alka and Siddhant are here from the team. And lastly, I must thank all the British Council colleagues who have worked tirelessly to put this event together. Thank you very much.